So we're going to do what's basically I think I'm going to turn into one of my cover designs or a pose for a graphic novel or comic book. What you basically want to sketch in at first, I usually start with this because it centers your piece, is you draw the larger portion of the skull. And you basically just draw one big circle and then a line down the center of the face, basically the line where the nose is going to be right between the eyes. And you want to extend it a little further past where you think the chin's going to be. That way you can extend the jaw straight down and then get that nice curve for the jawline, and where they meet is where the chin's going to be. And you can make a short face, a long face, it's up to you. It's basically where you change those dimensions. What I'm doing now is I'm just putting markers, measurement markers, where I'm going to put the eye line, the nose, and the mouth on this piece. And then lightly sketch in the neck to extend back from the jawline, and then a large oval, which is basically going to be the abbreviation for the rib cage or the torso. Again, you can slightly change the length or width of this depending on what sort of character you're going for. I'm going for a strong, athletic, heroic character here. So it's going to be a bit broad-shouldered and a very stern but long and elegant look. Also, what you want to do is draw a line down the center, which is going to basically be between the collarbones and the sternum. That's going to extend all the way down to where the belly button is going to be. Sometimes you can do it right where the crotch is going to be. So right here, I'm doing the hips. Now, the hips are wonderful because it's just this sort of like bell shape. Women do have an interesting thing where there are basically two curves. One is the ridge, where the hip bone actually is, and then the other one's actually where the bottom of the butt is going to be, and that's the bottom of the bell. And the bottom of the gluteus region is actually going to be where you draw the line straight across, and then that's basically where the crotch is going to be as well. Good markers. What I like about this shape as well is it's easy to just sketch in the waist or the area between, and usually the end of the bell, it'll automatically tell you where the legs are going to be. Now, as far as dimensions go, you saw me measure it earlier. The size of the bell, or the length of the bell, should be about the same size as the oval of the torso. And the femur should be about the size of basically from the collarbone down to the crotch region. It looks like here it's a little foreshortened, so I'm making it a bit shorter. Right, for any joints, it's good to just draw a circle, right? So usually lines from the collarbones to be where the shoulders are going to be, and then just pencil in circles to mark basically the deltoid or the shoulder muscle. And the only tricky part about that is the directionality, like if the arm is raised or if it's lowered or if it's sticking straight out or whatever. That line right there is actually from the armpits across the chest, because if you have any breasts with women that set higher than that, you're wrong. You can see I'm just taking measurements right here to do the humerus bone, basically. Checking my measurements and making sure I get the angle right, and then I do the same length for the radius and the ulna or the forearm. Now, what I do is I start like with gesture lines, basically, with both arms, and then I'll fill in the basic shapes with a cylinder or simple shapes to sort of estimate what's going on, and then basically put in the details after that or make slight adjustments. Again, a good reference that I just did there that may help is the length of the humerus should be about the length from the shoulder to that sort of divot to the hourglass shape. And again, the forearm is going to be the same length as the humerus. Right here, I'm just checking my measurements. And then for the wrist joint, doing a small oval. And then trying to get the shape. As you can tell, I'm going for a sort of fairly dynamic shape here. If she wasn't holding anything or posing, it would be a ridiculous pose that she's doing. But you can tell the humerus actually bends out towards the elbow. And then what I like to do is have the forearm sort of curve in and forward slightly. And that adds a real dynamic shape, a sort of a still or static action pose. So now that I have the basic reference laid out, I'm just starting to sharpen up the edges here and slowly checking my markers to make sure all the anatomy is in place. The trapezius is going to meet right at the top of the deltoid, and it should actually be lightly sketched in already because it should be the top. The trapezius muscles should be the top of the oval that you drew for the torso. Sorry if the contrast here isn't optimal, but I have to probably get better lighting, I think. I sort of have a haphazard setup here. So what am I doing here? Oh, the ears, what you want to do with the ears is actually do the top of the ear right where the eye line is. And then you basically want to have the bottom of the ear be right above the point of the jaw. And then right on the point of the jaw in a forward-facing character, that's where the neck is actually going to start. And as you can tell here, as I put in the anatomy, I'm putting in the, I believe those are the lateralis muscles, the tricep and the deltoid here for the arm. And I'm probably going to do a fairly angular trapezius muscle that I'll pencil in. And then I'll put a rather robust biceps muscle. Now, right here, this is actually, I really like these angles and moments here. The deltoid, when it comes across, it should actually start to extend out towards the chest and roll right underneath the collarbone, and it creates a nice moment there. And there I'm putting in the strong, muscly biceps because it's an athletic, heroic figure. And then penciling in the details and fleshing out the forearm. One error that I'm making right here is the elbow doesn't seem to be pointed properly. I'll probably fix that a little later. And sorry for the break, but I'm probably switching songs on my computer. It's good to have the basically an ovaloid or an ellipse shape to abbreviate what's going to go on right where the radius and the ulna meet to create the junction for the wrist. And you'll notice what I'll do is I'll actually use the line weight with the pencil to start to flesh out the character. So you start real loose and fluid with the directionality with the lines and the basic shapes, and then you basically start to add the meat on top of it. So you work with basic skeletal markers, and then you start working more with flesh markers afterwards. And the flesh markers is usually when you want to exaggerate the line weight and start a little bit of your shading. Now, what I'm doing here is with the hand, her fist is basically in the air, and she's making like I guess you could say like a black power sign. But that's because she's actually holding up a sword or she's going to be holding up a sword above her head. And it actually turned out pretty good. What you want to do with the angles for the hand is do the top of the hand or the meat of the hand as a rectangle, and then you can just draw horizontal lines to sort of mark where the knuckles are going to be, and then pencil in each finger as long as it follows the knuckle contours. You get a really nice angle on it. And I decided that she didn't look muscular enough, so I'm adding in more details and line weight. And then extending from the deltoid, I start the right breast. And as you can see, the top of the breast does not extend past that line. If they're wearing like a bustier or something, you can sort of have curves extend over the top there. But generally speaking, you want to do basically a teardrop shape towards the, where the breast is. And I almost never, if you watch look at the art of like Rob Liefeld or something like that, not only are all the proportions off and everything, but any breast that he does extends way past the cross line of the female's armpits, which never happens anatomically, unless I suppose if the person is deformed or had lived next to a toxic waste dump or whatever. Now with the left breast, I want to draw the marker where the nipple is because it's angled slightly to the side. And the reason for that is it's good to draw across to where the nipple line is going to be. That way you can have a marker for the tip curve of the breast, because it's going to arc up and then slightly point right where the nipple should be. And that's what I'm actually rounding out right here. And as you can see, I'm doing a sort of abbreviated teardrop shape here. Not the full teardrop shape. And I'm just adding line weight here to sort of flesh out the breasts. Don't mean to focus on those, but that's something that if you really mess up, it can ruin your entire composition. Now, if your line weight is too much or too chaotic, you can actually sort of use your eraser to subtract from the areas that you've penciled in that really shouldn't be there. So you're almost sketching as much with the eraser as you are with the pencil. With the pencil you add, and the eraser you subtract, and you basically just estimate the entire thing until it's fleshed out and it basically looks right. And it's the look that you're going for. Now it kind of looks like she's wearing shoulder pads, and she's not from the 80s. She's extremely muscular. I didn't really want like a Wonder Woman looking character. I wanted sort of like the definition of what a female knight would be. Now, since I'm going to ink this work, you notice I don't have gloves on, or I don't have paper between my hand and the paper, and this will be entirely smudged by the end of it. And that'll cut down on the contrast a little bit, but it's really not that big of a deal, since you're going to end up inking the piece anyway. So I'm adding more line weight here and just sort of estimating to get to basically flesh out the character, and doing markers with line weight to show what I'm thinking as far as shading goes and the light directionality of this. So I believe those are the lateralis muscles. I may be wrong. I'll have to double check that. But you want to pencil in the ears. The top of the ear is actually going to be right on that eye line that runs across the face. And the bottom of the ear is going to be right above. Sorry, I've got a cold, so it actually hurts to talk, but I had to finish this. It's going to drop right below the point of the jaw, or the corner of the jaw. So what I like to do first is when you're doing the eyes or the face, It's good. It's easy to get the expression if you just have the eyebrows in. The two areas of the face that show most of the facial expression are the eyebrows and the mouth. And then straight from the eyebrows, you can just sort of play around with the directionality and the expression of it. And then right below the eyebrows, it's basically good to start to pencil in the eyes right at that eye line. And when you're drawing in eyes, I usually go with a straight line for the top of the eye, and then that straight line, or it'll be slightly curved, I suppose, depending on the expression. With women, you can use a straighter line because they have a tendency to have angular eyes, almond eyes, and eyelashes. And then the corner of the eye, the outside corner of the eye, is going to terminate on that eye line exactly. And the inside corner of the eye is also going to terminate on that same eye line. So the markers that you did earlier are going to help you flesh in or draw in the more specific parts of the anatomy. So then when I'm comfortable at the size and the expression of the eyes and eyebrows, I'm going to start to pencil in the nose. And with the nose, I'd like to just sort of flesh out the bottom portion. You really don't want to draw, it looks really, really weird if you draw on too much of the top portion, or really if you draw the top portion at all. Usually there's a cast shadow right underneath the nose that extends to the top of the top of the upper lip. When I do mouths, what I like to do is I'll start with the marker that I had, and then I will do the top portion of the lip to give the mouth expression, and then you just sketch in lightly the small little cast shadow that there's going to be for the bottom portion of the lip. And when you do that, you can basically decide what sort of lips your character wants to have, whether they have thin lips, thick lips, or whatever. Also be careful about the expression that you're going to have with your character, and that make sure that the mouth fits with the eyes. Then after that, that's all penciled in, I like to start to sketch in the hair. And this character I thought would sort of have like wild flowing curvy or curly hair. And I do really like the way it turned out. I decided to go with the real angular graphic look here. I thought that fit the theme of what I was drawing pretty well. So as you can see here, I'm lightly penciling in the outline. And when I do this, I'm basically doing it in chunks. So with the hair, you want to do like each curl you want to do is like as if it's cut sheets of paper, or perhaps pieces of cloth that are layered over one another, because you're not going to draw in each strand of hair. So once I have the general thing sketched in, which I presently do, I start to pencil in details. I like to use the belly button and the rib cage as a marker, because that'll show you what's going to happen with the abdomen and the cast shadows. And this character will be wearing armor, so it tends to be a little geometric and fairly robust in certain areas, rather angular. Now, generally speaking, once you have with these tutorials, sometimes I actually think that I just sort of want to stop up to halfway through, because the way I look at it is once the general outline or the gesture of the character is drawn, the piece is basically finished, and the rest of it you're just filling in details. So what I'm just slowly doing is picking and choosing areas on the character that I want more dense line weight, that will give me a marker for what sort of shading I'm going to have, or what sort of shadows are going to be on the figure. Now, notice the line weight. That's actually very important when drawing with pencil. When you're lightly sketching and doing gestures, you want extremely light line work. You don't want to go very sharp. And you notice as the piece goes on, I actually press with the pencil even harder. And as you press harder with the pencil, you get a deeper and thicker line. And the contrast sort of starts to come out. So you go from very general and light to very dark and specific. And then later on when you ink, you go even darker and specific. So even though I'm lightly shading in certain areas here, and I'm just going to ink this with just general ink line work, the shading still helps because that tells me when I ink what sort of line thickness there should be to indicate shading. Now, you'll notice that, like the breast, you're going to have an area of the armpit, right, where there's like a gap between the side of the breast and the armpit. And usually what you want to do is the line that extends from the deltoid, right, or rather the bicep, it's going to slide under the deltoid, and then that under portion of the deltoid is going to curve right into the side of the breast. And unless somebody has their breast like smashed up or something like that, it's always going to have a curve right there. And that's basically because the pectoralis muscle actually slides underneath the rib cage and the deltoid. So the pectoralis muscle is actually draws in the same direction as the deltoid. So here, as I said, she's holding a sword. So I just sketched in the hilt really quickly, and it's a rather large sort of organic bone sword, I guess you could say. And one of the rare times you'll actually see me use a ruler here. But I want to make sure that I get the directionality and the line of that just perfect. So, although that is something you can just sketch in freehand. So here, what I believe I'm doing is sketching in the shading that's going to happen around the breast, because she'll actually be wearing armor for this. So it's the cast shadow on the bottom portion of the breast, and the nipple, oddly enough, is very important. So right here, like I just said, what I'm starting to do here is actually pencil in the armor. It's sort of like an organic bikini armor. The characters themselves in the book actually are able, all the armor and weapons that they use are entirely 100% organic and actually part of their body. That's like their superpower, I guess you could say, is that they can control their own biology. So what I just did here is, because she's wearing body armor, I decided to pencil in something like, I guess you could say it's comparable to Witchblade, if you're familiar with that. And it's best if you follow the areas of the armor, not just with the anatomy, but with the skeleton. So as you can see, with the sort of corset body armor that she has on, or that she's wearing in this image, I'm having the coverage of the body armor actually cover the rib cage. And part of that is important because when you shade, it's important to develop those same markers for the anatomy, because that way you can actually accentuate the areas of the body and show parts of the anatomy while they're still actually formally clothed. So right here, this is kind of a tricky area. Like I said, there are two portions of the hip. Right is at the curve of the hip bone, and then the other one is usually like towards the bottom part of the butt. And she is actually wearing straps because she has explosives that she uses in combat. So the belt actually has to hang and have gravity on it. So as you can see, the one around the hip, it's actually hanging right above the top curve of the hip. And the ones on her thigh, of course, are weighted down. And for some reason, I just thought it would look cool if they crossed one another. So part of this, I believe, is that her entire arm is going to be covered in sort of a body armor that she can also use offensively. So there's going to be a blade that will extend from the elbow here. And what I really like about that is you can show like a protrusion of where the elbow blade is going to be as like an extension of the bone structure itself. And what I like about this is it actually adds to the directionality and the dynamism of the pose. Now, it turned out pretty well when I inked it, but I do really like the pose in this, but also the little shading moments that I had between the fingers and knuckles here. What I have with the knuckles is she actually has blades that are coming off the knuckles as well. And since everything's already sort of sketched in and marked as far as my markers and shapes go, I'm just being rather fatalistic here with the line work and adding a lot of heft and a lot of weight to it to really force the image off the page. Now, it's really important stylistically to, what do I want to say, show a stress that happens on the body. So like when somebody makes a fist, you can actually see like their skin being stretched over certain joints in certain areas. Big areas of that, usually not the thighs or the abdomen. You don't want to do it there. But with the arms, shoulders, and in particular with the wrists and hands, that adds a really interesting and graphic look if you develop that really well. And sometime I'll do a short tutorial on just hand anatomy if anyone would like to see that. So here, since I decided that her arm is going to be entirely armored, I'm doing the muscles in sections because in order to move, the armor itself is going to have to be in sections. So the areas where there are joint spaces and so forth actually are going to have to be flexible. So kind of like with Knight's armor, you know, one of the weakest points was actually in the armpit because they couldn't cover the armpit in armor because then they couldn't move. I suppose you could have like chainmail, but all of their stuff is organic, so it's very strong. But actually, I think in the fight scenes I'll have the weak parts. No, I'll guard the neck, but the weak parts will probably be like the armpits or the inner thigh or something. Areas that have a lot of stress on them because of motion. So since I've already sort of put in the weight of the deltoid and everything, and converted the muscle tissue, what I'm starting to do is put in sort of like panels or plate armor, I guess you could say, for this character. And I think it looks pretty cool because we want plate armor on the shoulder because it's highly mobile and stuff, but also it can act offensively and defensively and act as good protection. So as you can see with these sections of the armor, underneath in the armpit, I'm doing a lot of line work to show. When you're doing something like this, basically you want to show the density of line and darkness in the areas where there's going to be a lot of motion. Areas where there's not going to be a lot of motion, you can basically just have a solid sheet across, like with the thighs or maybe perhaps the calf muscles or something like that. So I'm not sure, but I may have made her a little too curvaceous. I'm not really positive on that yet. I guess when I do the shading in Photoshop on my tablet monitor, I'll make that decision if it was too much. So normally if you're drawing a woman, she wouldn't be this muscular unless it's like Wonder Woman or something like that. They would tend to be a little less angular and a little less curvy or more curvy. But with this character, I thought I made the face slightly angular, but I thought I did well enough with the hips and the torso to make her feminine. So you can always tell if your character or your figure is feminine enough if without hair it looks female. So if without hair it looks male, then you probably want to make it a little more curvy. So here we're working on the deltoid, and I'm probably going to have a similar sort of plate armor here. So I'm penciling that in. Except what I'm doing here is you can see the point of the plate armor actually meets together across the line of the deltoid muscle. So doing something like that, you actually add a roundness and a dimensionality to the work to show the proportions of everything with your anatomy. So here I'm making the bicep about as muscular on the left as it is the right. And I think if I'm not mistaken, she's also going to have an elbow blade here. And what I do like about the biceps is it makes a really beautiful angle with the muscles of the forearm and the deltoid muscle. The biceps actually are going to run right the center of the arm underneath, and then the biceps is going to start right at the point of where the deltoid terminates. Use that as a marker, and that's basically, so it's going to start and end in the dead center of the arm in both instances. So you can see what I'm doing here is that oval that I put for the wrist, there's actually a point where the radius and ulna, a really beautiful point that I like, radius and ulna, that creates sort of a lip that makes the wrist joint pop out. And that's adding to the angularity in the pose here. So I'm starting to develop that with the hand, with the line density here. Now, when doing hands, what I like to do is you just do a basic shape in the form of a rectangle to actually get the hand itself, and then you can do a triangle for the meat of the thumb. And then right from the triangle, at the point of the triangle for the meat of the thumb, you can basically pencil in whichever direction the thumb itself is going. And what I did earlier, if you can see, is they're the metacarpals, I believe. It's the long bones of the hand. It's really cool if you can actually just draw those out to where they terminate with the knuckle. It makes a really interesting shape and develops your anatomy really well. Now, I had to go switch tables here for whatever reason, so sorry for that interruption. And the light isn't that great here either, but we'll press on. So one of the tricky parts when doing characters like this is actually developing the abdomen. Because normally with women, if you develop the abdomen too much, and it's too linear, it starts to look really, really weird. But she's got like a full body armor thing going on. So I'm starting to sort of develop her abdomen muscles to basically show the plates of armor. So where each muscle of the abdomen is, I guess she has a 6-pack or an 8-pack. It's basically, there's going to be a plate of armor, and right at the lines of the abs is where those little flexed areas are going to be that lacks armor. But in this work, it creates a really nice cast shadow effect, which I think looks pretty cool. So what I just did here is I decided to make the armor on her hip have a flexible look to it to increase mobility. So it's like plate armor, but it actually comes in the directionality as if there were like a wrapped up towel that wrapped around her thigh and over her hip. And when you do something like that, you can actually develop the angles of the body to, again, develop the dimensionality some more. So here I'm starting to pencil in the details, but I'm increasing the line work, as you can see, in the areas where there's a lot of shading. So I'm a bit of a perfectionist, so even if something's in, I'll tweak it and play with it until basically I think it looks right enough. So if you're doing a work, don't be afraid to just play with it until it looks right. If it just looks wrong, erase it, or if one area looks wrong, erase that, and then put more line work in the areas that you think look correct. So it's a constant process of editing and re-editing. So she sort of has, what do you call them? Are they garter belts? I guess. But she has a plate of armor, or rather armor on her thigh, that runs in the form of, I guess, or stockings, perhaps? I don't really know what those are. I don't wear them, so I'm unfamiliar with the terminology. But what I did there is you can see the point of the stocking, I guess you could say, runs right up the center of the thigh where the thigh muscle is going to be. So again, it sort of suggests as to the anatomy that's underneath and the dimensionality of the figure. It's very hard sometimes when you're doing a graphic work to actually fill out the figure, that is, make it look three-dimensional, because you don't have the, you can't really necessarily rely on shading in order to do that. You have to strictly suggest it with your line work. So we're about finished with the pencils here. Sorry if it's not complete enough, but I basically marked down enough information on the page that will allow me to ink it properly. So it won't be a fully fledged pencil work, but it's good enough definitely for inking. And I think it qualifies as a good enough pencil piece. But it's not necessarily something that I would post or turn in as a completed work. With pencils, I'm even more of a control freak and more of a perfectionist. Probably because that's what I started drawing with. So here I'm going to start to develop the sword a little bit. And as you can see, the sword is made out of a similar material as her body armor. So it's sort of like a mixed composite of like keratin fibers, which are what like rhino horns are made out of, and nails, and bone. I think that would be a pretty cool combination. So it's sort of like the hilt I'm turning into sort of like a bat symbol sort of thing. And I'm starting to draw the blade of the sword as if it's like a bone organically growing out of the hilt itself. which I think looks pretty cool. I gave some thought with these characters of actually having. I drew one of them where the female sword or axe, it's like an axe sword thing. Uh, there's like an umbilical cord that attaches to it. So since they can control their biology, uh, like she could actually like increase its like blade edge or the size of the sword or the shape of it or anything in real time. I think that would be pretty cool. Plus, you could never lose the sword because it would constantly be attached to you. So here I'm starting to pencil in the hair, at least just enough information for me to ink with. Generally, with hair, I want to say when doing comic work, less is more, right? So if you're trying to like pencil in uh, each follicle of hair, you're doing it wrong.